Maria Fyodorovna Semyonova with her big dumb face.
The longest opening sequence.
That is midlife crisis.
When are all chairs bolted to the...
We're not told that.
Yeah, we do.
We're not told that.
It is written. It is written.
Welcome to horror season, everybody.
Yay! Horror
Yay,
season.
cheers to the best month ever.
horror season.
Yeah, excellent.
Horror season.
Oh, I heard what you did there.
I don't know what you're talking
I am in my favorite place in the world, a creepy cabin with a creepy fire, possibly some creepy faces in all these windows. So just let me know if you see something.
That's what I want to see. That's
I
what
got the
wanna see.
shoddy over there, loaded up over there, ready to go. So
Ready to go.
but yeah,
You have the
no,
chainsaw?
well, yeah, I gotta oil it up. No better place to watch horror movies by yourself than in a creepy cabin in the woods on a lake. So anyway, how's your October so far, McCurds?
It's pretty good. I've seen I watched The Exorcist and I watched The Fly.
Good.
And then I'm
Good.
gonna get on my usual kick of wanting to watch the Universal monster movies. So
Nice.
doing that as well.
I just stockpile horror movies all year. And then I just, I try not to watch them, and then I just watch them all. I got to keep an eye on this fire too. Every time I hear a pop, I'm going to be like, oh, it might burn the place down. But yeah, and then just in October, I just go nuts. It's fantastic. Just real quick, K1, if you're still with us, this is true. Whatever happens, we still have Exorcist 3. So, which I just watched a few hours ago, rewatched a few hours ago, and it's great as always. That I don't think will ever mess with the original, but I don't know. It's what's nice about that movie is that it's just like a different cup of tea, and me, that's what I like. I like when I'm the guy who likes when Bond movies do something new rather than just doing the same thing every time. So anyway, let's get to it. Ready, McCurds?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not going to go full screen because I'll probably just reshoot this later.
Yeah, you're gonna redo it. It's all good.
Yeah, I'll redo it later. All right. The Exorcist believer ups the exorcism ante by giving us not one possessed little girl, but two possessed little girls. It follows the original Exorcist film's true-to-life approach, honing in on the human drama of the characters and using this knowledge to heighten the intensity of the exorcism scenes. But does it go far enough? Not quite. Like Creed 3, the final fight feels just a beat short of truly earning its payoff. And that payoff was designed to come down to a simple choice that the odd team of exorcist super friends, a witch doctor, a Catholic priest, a Baptist minister, the parents, etc., were forced to make. Only that choice was written as to be stacked in the favor of one of the girls over the other, thereby weakening the emotional significance and intended tragedy of the climax. So just like the creator, the movie is very effective and creepy up until the third act, where it comes off as rushed and contrived, and therefore doesn't hold a votive candle to its predecessors. Speaking of which, they brought back the original characters and for some reason did absolutely nothing with them. Which is probably the biggest misstep of the movie. It was like, okay, so you just brought them back just because they wanted a paycheck and you just wanted to loosely connect it to the previous, not quite trilogy. I know there's like roughly 4 or 5 movies.
It's not even there's 5 movies, but yeah, this is not we'll talk about it. We'll talk all about it.
Let's talk about it right now.
All about it. Let's all talk about it. Let's all talk about these movies, shall we? Let's get ranked. We are getting very close to the end, my friend.
Yes.
We're getting close to the end, and I feel like
we're gonna cap at 52.
Let's just go to the end of the. Let's just go. I want to go
2023 movies the rest of our lives. There's got to be
that's all we do.
We haven't even gotten into Bollywood. Imagine how many movies we have coming out.
There was a big one that came out this year too. I'm pretty sure there was a big Bollywood movie that in America no one saw.
I just wish we could have covered RRR. I wish. No heroin. Oh,
no
heroin. Merch.
We got our merch, baby. If you haven't bought any, you should do so because
Just get a no heroin shirt so people will look at you weird.
Everybody needs a no heroin shirt.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing wrong with that statement. Like if someone got offended, you'd be like, well, what are you pro heroin?
Pro heroin.
Pro heroin?
Make a pro.
No, no one's pro heroin unless you're an addict. But let's just talk about this movie. We have The Exorcist Believer, directed by David Gordon Green, written by Peter Sattler and David Gordon Green, story by Scott Teems, Danny McBride, and David Gordon Green, based on characters by William Peter Blatty.
And not that Danny McBride, right?
It is. No, it is.
It is? Wow. Because it's like him and David Gordon Green are buddies or something. Because they
did a bunch of, they've done a bunch of stuff together. So
yeah,
I'll talk about it. But yeah, they've done a bunch of stuff together. So let me, I was going to say briefly, but then as I wrote it, I was like, this isn't brief. So I'm going to kind of breeze through these movies, not really the plots or anything like that. Just kind of talk about the franchise as a whole, if you will. So let's talk about the Exorcist franchise for a moment. The original was based on William Peter Blatty's book of the same name that was published in 1971. Blatty wrote an adaptation for the 1973 film that was directed by the late William Friedkin, best known for The French Connection as well as this film. Blatty based the script on his reading of the 1949 exorcism of Roland Doe, which is actually an anonymous name for a boy who was 14 years old. I guess it was like very famous story, and like he read this and he wanted to write it and make it into a book. But actually, I think it was his publishers were like kind of said, no, don't do that. Do you don't want to write that? And eventually he said, no, screw it. I'm going to write it because he saw Rosemary's Baby, and he didn't like how Rosemary's Baby ends. So he was like, I'm going to write a better story. And so he ends up with writing The Exorcist. Wow. And that book became a bestseller. And I actually read that apparently when it first upon release, no one really cared about it that much until he went on a talk show and was talking about, do you think the devil's real? And like, I guess it spooked a lot of people, and a lot of people went ahead and started reading this book. Became an instant bestseller then. And then the film,
real quick, do you sound okay in your own ear?
Yes, I sound, well, I can't tell. Do I sound bad?
Well, I don't know if that's just my headphones.
It might be.
Being on my mobile unit, I don't know, but it's like,
let me continue.
It sounds funky. So,
okay. I will not talk as loud, maybe.
Don't be so funky.
Don't be so funky.
No, it's more like it's just kind of, it sounds, it's not like it's clipping
echoing
or anything. No, it's not echoing. It's not clipping. It just sounds like it sounds like it's a problem on my end, but it's still, I don't have any way to check. So,
all right. Well, let's continue, shall we? So the book was a bestseller, and the film adaptation was also a smash hit financially and critically. It earned Blatty an Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay. The film was nominated for several awards, which is crazy because it's a horror film. It was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, and Best Sound, which it only won for Best Adapted Screenplay, but it's a Best Adapted Screenplay by the author of the book, which is even nuts. The other films, however, didn't garner anywhere near the same praise. You and I briefly talked about Exorcist 2, which was in 1977, directed by Excalibur and Zardoz director John Boorman, was critically panned and made a potential third film look obsolete. And also Blatty and Friedkin were not even involved in that movie at all. It was pretty much, let's get a sequel out there kind of mentality.
It was, it was like, it was a straight up cash grab, and it feels that way. It just feels really cheap. Feels, the whole movie, the reason why it's so, I just watched it for the first time today, and the reason why it's so terrible, because the whole movie, you're just sitting there like, what are we getting at? What is the point? And it reflects their mentality in putting it together, because it was like, I briefly looked at Wikipedia, and I think it was some producer, somebody attached to the project was like, we just wanted to get a sequel out, and we wanted to just use unused footage from the first movie while just kind of recreating the first movie. So it's a very cynical approach to a sequel that nobody cared about other than greenbacks, and the whole plot is like this is another one of those where I go, there really is no plot. And what I mean by that is there's nothing carrying you from one scene to the next. So the whole time, whereas in the first movie, you're going, okay, I'm
There's an
concerned about this girl.
escalation. There's an
Yeah.
escalation of like finding, and much like
what's
the movie
gonna
we're
happen?
going to talk about. Yeah. Like
Yeah,
we
what's
have
gonna happen to this girl?
something's wrong with her. And now
Yeah.
I've got to go to the doctors. The doctors can't figure out what's wrong with her. We go to a psychologist, which in the 70s was a big kind of like, not like it is today. People freaking out. And then finally we get to The Exorcist. But it's like a build up versus what you're describing is like event after event after event. It doesn't really tie together.
Yeah.
That film, yeah, again, critically panned, and they didn't think they were going to make a third film. Now, Exorcist 3, on the other hand, brought a return to form with the writer Blatty taking on the role as writer and the director. It gained a fair box office return, but had mixed reviews. This film was also released through 20th Century Fox, first two through Warner Brothers. That's only significant because apparently this franchise has changed hands by different studios multiple times. And then in 2004, we got a prequel, Exorcist: The Beginning, again with poor reviews and a lackluster box office. But then wait, one more year later, we get Paul Schrader, who is famous for being the writer of Taxi Driver, decided he was going to get his stab at it. And he directed Dominion, prequel to Exorcist. And again, it was a failure. And then we also got a TV show in 2016, and it only ran about 2 seasons. So the Exorcist franchise it's there, but it's not like this huge hit besides the first film. Like the first film, you can go online. First film, you can go online and see like Exorcist release 1973. There are lines out the door. Like people, like it was a craze. You know, people are scared of this movie. It was claimed to be the scariest movie ever made, which watching it now, I'm like, not really. But back then it was huge. And now it's like every subsequent sequel they've made has not been anywhere near as good.
Well, okay, so real quick though, just real quick on without getting into it, the fourth and fifth movies are the same movie. That's a whole mess in and of itself. Where they,
I don't know if they are they, because I've never seen either of those.
They are. There's I can't exactly recall, and that's why I won't get into it too deeply. But they're the same movie, and I remember so I saw them in high school when they came out, and it was very confusing because they're like the same movie, but kind of recut, and or it's like the same script maybe, but it's like an embarrassing mess. It's not worth getting into because it's an embarrassing mess. The only other standout is The Exorcist 3, which was
right.
It was my fault. My headphones are being weird. I could barely hear anything you said, but
okay,
we're good. It was my headphones.
We're good. But Exorcist 3, I've heard this too. Is that the third one is genuinely really good.
Yeah, and because it actually has something to say. It's another one of these stories about a guy struggling with his faith. You get that in the first movie. You get that in the third movie. You get that in Believer. And that's always going to be fodder for a good religious story because there's always going to be people struggling. And, you know, people coming to the conclusion of like, evil exists, bad things happen to good people. Therefore, God isn't real, which is like, you know, being where I'm at now in my life, I see that as something that like a conclusion that a naive teenager comes to. And adults do it too, but usually it's because something bad happened to them and they haven't yet seen how that bad thing will inevitably lead to some good in their life, or at least they refuse to accept that just there is an element of randomness to life. So when something bad happens to you, they curse you, God, and it's just kind of immature, as if only good things should happen to people all the time, which is naive. But the thing about Exorcist 3, the tragedy is that it's called The Exorcist 3. It's based on a book called Legion. If only they would have just called it Legion or called it like The Exorcist Legion or something like that. But by calling it Exorcist 3, I basically I wish they would have just gotten rid of the heretic entirely and just said this movie is no longer canon. It's just an embarrassing
Well,
mistake. And
apparently,
that William
the
Peter
third
Blatty would have
one.
just called it Legion
Apparently,
or
when this
something.
third one came out, apparently when the third one came out, the script of the third one they even recognized as like it just says 2 never really happened. This is the true sequel. Like,
But
kind of,
to call it Exorcist 3 is therefore a tragedy because it
Right.
teaches new people to go, oh well, I have to watch 2 first, and then they watch 2 and they say this is terrible. Why would I watch 3? Right. So it shoots itself in the foot by calling itself like some kind of obligation to call it The Exorcist because that's a pre-sold property, so that has to be in the title. But if only it would have just been just like this movie, The Exorcist Believer. If it would have been The Exorcist : Legion, that would have been great,
Right.
you know. And and it really ties into the first movie where
It's the detective, isn't it? It's like that's kind of the
it's
big tying part, right?
it's the detective, and all I'll say is that the corpse of the priest who dies in the first movie comes back. So it's continuing this dead man. I won't say anything more than that, but
Cool.
it's Brad Dourif is in it, who is Wormtongue in Lord of the Rings, and he brings it
I
as
heard
always.
I
He's
remember seeing things about like his performance in that is like outstanding.
terrifying. And so I thoroughly recommend it. And having seen The Heretic for the first time, I'm like, just skip it. There's nothing of value that you get from The Heretic at all, unfortunately. So
The only good thing I've heard of The Heretic is there's this genuinely great jump scare, but that's it. That's the only thing I've heard about it. Only good thing I've heard. So with the nun and it like comes out with the scissors.
Oh, that's in the third one.
Oh, that's in the third. Okay, well then never mind.
Nothing from The Heretic.
Nothing. So, all right, let's move on to this film's director and one of its writers, David Gordon Green. So off of what I guess you could call a success of the Halloween soft reboot. Success, right? Quote, big quotes there. Success. The Halloween soft reboot sequels. Green with his team, which includes Danny McBride, is spearheading the same thing with the Exorcist franchise. This is after Universal with Blumhouse Productions spent $400 million on distribution rights. So like we talked about this way back when our first episode of this series aired about Megan, about how like, remember the intro and you see Blumhouse and it's all these different horror films that you've seen over the years. This is like, they want to take Exorcist because it was a Warner Brothers property originally. They want to put it in their little wheelhouse of horror films. So they spent a lot of money on the distribution rights for this. Green's first film was called George Washington and goes all the way back in 2000. He's probably best known for the comedies Pineapple Express and Your Highness. He has crossed several genres. So like his filmography is like drama. And then he did some like big budget comedies. And then he's done drama. And now he went to horror films. So he's been all over the place as far as genres go. And then
what dramas was he in?
Not dramas. He's just done like dramas films. Like he.
Are you talking about David Gordon Green or Danny McBride?
Yes, David Gordon.
Never mind then.
Sorry,
I was like, when did Danny McBride do some drama?
Right. Well, and then also we were talking about Danny McBride. You were asking me like, wait, Danny McBride, like, how is you sure? And you're like, yeah, David Gordon Green directed a couple episodes of Eastbound and Down, as well as Vice Principals and a couple other projects that Danny McBride's done. So they're very close, apparently. He is planning on directing. So David Gordon Green is doing a sequel to this. There's a follow-up that's already in the works called The Exorcist Deceiver, because it rhymes.
Is there a third yet?
Yeah, they're gonna do a third as well. So they're gonna do like 3 of these movies. I don't know. Let's see. Believer, Deceiver, Retriever, Receiver. I don't know. The Golden Receiver, Retriever.
Believer. And they bring in
Believer. Justin Bieber.
Yeah,
okay, so I have to bring
Justin Bieber gets possessed by Satan.
So I have to bring this. I saw this online someplace else, and then I saw it also. I don't know if it's true or not. I just saw it on IMDb, but and you'll love this. So on William Friedkin's, because William Friedkin, the original director of the first film, he had passed away recently, and he was like kind of, he's always, you know, a lot of people have said he's like one of the best directors there ever was, but you know, he probably, you know, he did a handful of really great movies in the 70s and then kind of just fell off the face of the earth. And you'll probably see him in like a documentary here or there talking about movies, but he was like, you know, people praised him essentially. But on William Friedkin's passing, writer and film critic Ed Whitfield posted this on Twitter and Facebook. William sorry, I'm mixing my words. William Friedkin once said to me, Ed, the guy who made those new Halloween sequels is about to make one of my movies, The Exorcist. That's right. My signature film is about to be extended by the man who made Pineapple Express. I don't want to be around when that happens, but if there's a spirit world and I can come back, I plan to possess David Gordon Green and make his life a living hell.
Wow. Well, I mean, no, like
That's
possess him and make a good movie.
That would be better. Yeah.
That would be good. That would be great. But, you know, so other than David Gordon Green, which I think he did a fantastic job on Halloween.
His directing is good, but like the first Halloween, I think is good.
The first Halloween, as in, you know,
Of
this
his.
one would have been an incredible capper. Of course, the moment that it's good and also makes a lot of money, they're going to make a sequel. And Halloween Kills was such an embarrassing mess. I was like, to the point where I don't think I'll ever watch Halloween Ends until maybe we officially do.
I've heard one of my good friends has told me enough about Halloween Ends, or I'm like, you're kidding. That's what happens. And he's like, yeah, it's silly. It gets stupid. And I'm like, okay.
It's sad.
But I've never seen Kills either. So
because Halloween was so good. It was such an appropriate ending, and it had something to say about the world. It really had this like, it was one of my favorite themes, which is idealism versus reality. And you have this deeply traumatized woman who's like, prepare for the end. And then you have her daughter who's like, no, Mom, the world isn't a scary, awful place. The world is about love and peace. And then this horrible serial killer comes back to kill all of them. And she has to face reality and pick up a gun. Outside of DGG though, Jason Blum, good for him. Whether these movies are good or bad, good for him. He's living the life where all of these franchises, he's like, oh, I own the horror genre. Let me just buy up all of them then and just keep going. And, you know, regardless of this movie not exactly being up to snuff, still good on him. Good on him. I wish they'd kind of, you know, do better, but all the same, it's like, good for you, dude. You get to buy up and ruin, or maybe not, but ruin all your favorite franchises. So good work.
All right, let's move on. We don't have very many slides, but tonight, but let's talk about Leslie Odom Jr. He's been in a lot of films, TV and theater over the years, including Red Tails, which was the George Lucas written movie about the why I'm blanking on names, but you know what I'm talking about. Murder on the Orient Express. We saw Haunting in Venice not too long ago, Harriet, and the Sopranos prequel, and then also Glass Onion, which kind of ties back in with Murder on the Orient Express. But most people today would probably just recognize him from the Broadway play Hamilton, where he plays his nemesis Aaron Burr. So he's good. He's an actor. He's an actor. You know, he's good. Yeah. He's good. Like, it's not much else to say about him. He's good. I'm going to move on. I'm just going to go ahead and go. There's way more cast to this movie. I just kind of was like, let's just talk about the people that I think are standouts. The people that
we should always just talk about standouts.
Let's just talk about the standouts, especially in this movie, because there's just a lot of people. So I'm going to run through the more important people. So we got Ann Dowd. She plays Anne, the nurse neighbor. That's her name's Anne, and she plays Anne. How great. You've seen her in such films as Lorenzo's Oil, Philadelphia, Garden State, Marley and Me, and Hereditary, which is another great horror film that you should definitely check out. So she's in this movie. She's got some scenery to chew. And then we also have our two possessed girls in this film. We got Lydia Jewett, plays Angela Fielding. She shares my birthday, by the way. I was looking up her birthday. I was like, wait a minute, that's my birthday.
How
And she's
cute.
been in several films such as Hidden Figures and Good Girls. Then we have Olivia O'Neill, which I think that's correct. I kept jumping back and forth with different sources. I think her last name's, I might have her last name incorrect, but she plays Catherine. And as far as I can tell, this is her first film. So
Why is
based off
there confusion about her name?
because I looked at the Wikipedia and then I looked at IMDb and I'm like, I don't know if either of these are correct. So one of them's correct.
Weird. Okay.
Yeah. So I guess somebody had put the wrong name. I don't know. Anyway,
Huh.
I think this might be her first film. She does a fantastic job. They both
There
do a
was no
fantastic job.
introducing though, right?
I don't remember if I saw.
I
Well,
didn't-
at the
I don't
end, I
recall
think
seeing
they
it,
put
but-
their names towards the end of the list, though, because usually when you
Okay.
do that, there's like a significance to that. But yeah, they're both great, and they're creepy, and like I think those are probably one of the harder roles to pull off because one, you have to like embody this. Basically have to embody this really creepy, scary person. You have to.
You
wear
have to be both
terrible-
very innocent and
Yes.
a devilish fiend, right?
And you have to put on a bunch of makeup, which isn't
Yeah.
not like that's not fun. Like to be in makeup
you-
for long
like,
hours.
Linda
It's not
Blair
fun.
apparently said, "I'll only do the sequel if I don't have to put any makeup on," because she went through hell in the first movie.
Right.
Which you're like, you could just put the makeup on one day, if having seen the movie, you know that there's not that much that she would have had to do, but all the same. But compare this to the Pope's Exorcist, where the boy the whole time was just doing this. This is what he was doing, and
Yeah.
these performances
subtle.
compared to Pope's Exorcist was a lot more just like visceral, and just
Yeah.
believable. So
Yeah. Not over the top.
kudos
not
to them.
Like kind of cartoonish.
not just doing this and then taking the voice and having it. He was just like being serpentine the whole time. And then they just
and they
deepened
just
his
put.
voice.
I mean, you watch this and they just put these girls through hell. And also, I think some
Yeah.
of the weird behavior that they do, just weird behavior, not when they're trying to be ultra scary towards the end of the movie, but just the weird behavior, the subtlety of as they're becoming more and more scary throughout the film, and you realize they're more and more possessed or whatever. Even those little performances I think are great. Like the church scene where she's like playing with her feet and just being weird to her brother and sister. I was like, damn, that's good. Thought that was good.
That's there were everything with them was incredibly effective. Are you done with your slides?
I have one more slide.
All right, go ahead, and then we'll talk.
Okay,
Go.
let's talk about the last two. Our returning cast members, our two returning cast members. We have Ellen Brewston returns as Chris McNeil. Brewston had said originally she refused to return, but they offered her double salary, which she accepted and donated to charity. Besides the OG Exorcist, she is also known for The Last Picture Show and Requiem for a Dream. She is currently the co-president of the Actors Studio in New York City, which is a big deal because that's like what was it? That was like the Marlon Brando school of acting, essentially, back in the day, where like all the big actors went. It is speculated that her character in the book and the film was inspired by actress Shirley MacLaine. So you can see MacLaine similarities, who was actually Beatty's neighbor. And then I think from what I read, originally Shirley MacLaine, like they wanted her for the role of this part, but then they ended up giving it to Ellen Brewston. And then, of course, we got very, very briefly, we get Linda Blair returns as Reagan McNeil in a very brief cameo at the very end of this movie. And she was
a
last
cameo
in the franchise.
A
Very
cameo.
briefly. She returns and she was last seen in the franchise in Exorcist 2, but she also spoofed her own film in the movie Repossessed, which also starred Leslie Nielsen. Yeah. And it was in 1990, and it only came out a month after, it was a month after the third film. So it was a very small movie. It came out, but yeah, she spoofed her own movie, and she's like the lead. She's the main star in that film. So I think that's funny. But Charlie, that's all I have for this film. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how great this movie is and why what you liked, what you didn't like.
So what you were just saying a minute ago, The highlight of the movie is definitely the girls, and specifically the probably the most effective, just like the first movie. What is kind of haunting about the first movie is that you're concerned about this girl because we know something's wrong with her,
Right.
and we know it's a spiritual matter. We know that inevitably we're going to need an exorcism. We're going to need an old priest and a young priest, as Dr. Evil said. So when she's going through, at some point, the mom, Chris, is in a room with dozens of doctors, and none of them have nobody can figure out this mystery of what's wrong with this girl because every test comes back and she's perfectly healthy. And
Right.
at the same time, you're watching her be tortured by these doctors. They're doing spinal taps, they're doing
Yeah, there's the
x-rays
one
and
scene where they do the where they like
MRIs.
go in and like but it's the
Yeah.
1970s and we
Ugh.
don't have the
Yeah.
MRI that we have today, so they have to like
Yeah.
go in. And I've had so many I can tell you the number of times I've been scanned, and it's like a lot. But it's not watching it in the movie. It's just it's painful. Like it is
Yeah.
just painful. And like I've in like today's modern medicine, a lot of times, especially with those MRI scans, the only thing you're getting pricked, you might get pricked for contrast, so they can put contrast through your blood, so when they scan you, they can see things a little bit clearer. But this, it's like they're like putting needles and things in spots where you're
she's
just
in
like,
there and she's like and
she's awake.
You feel so because you know that what's
awake.
happening is that nothing's going to come of it. You know that she's being tortured
Awful.
needlessly. And then that was echoed in this movie where both girls, they go missing for 3 days. They go missing and then they show up randomly and they have no memory of what happened. And just like with Regan in the first film, they were messing around in the spiritual realm when they shouldn't have been. So in the first movie, Regan is using a Ouija board.
It's subtle because
Yes.
I remember this was the one thing that I always was like, every time I go back to The Exorcist, I'm always like, wait, how did she get possessed?
Why
Like,
her?
that's the first question. How does
Yeah.
she get possessed? Because the first movie, and I guess we skipped over this part about this movie, but the first movie opens up in Iraq. And it's you're in an archaeological expedition, and you're like, this movie that takes place in Georgetown, and there's in a bedroom, and opens up in Iraq. And you find out that basically it's the Exorcist, the Exorcist, as the title says, he's also an archaeologist, and he's finding all these old relics, including these sculptures. And one of those sculptures is of this demon named Pazuzu. And it's like, I always thought like, well, how is that connected to the movie, or how's that connected to her? But really, all it comes down to is that there's one scene very briefly where the mom, who's an actress, she doesn't, she's not spending a lot of time with her daughter, and she comes home and she gets every moment she can. She's talking to her daughter, and she's in the basement, and there's a house they're renting, and she's like, oh, what's this? Why do you have this? And she's like, oh, I found it's a Ouija board, and I was playing with it. And she shows how her mom, and there's this guy named Captain Howdy. I talked to Captain Howdy. And it's like, now it's become a cliche, but you see that all the time now in other possession movies, where they'll talk about, don't play with Ouija boards because you will basically summon demons.
You're inviting foul spirits.
Yeah. But I will also tell you that, like, my very Catholic wife will tell you that, like, even in the Bible it says you should not speak to the dead or try to speak to the dead. So it's like, like it's there's the warnings there. But in that movie, it's subtle. It's just like very brief thing where she's like, okay, you get the idea, she's been doing this, but we're not really focused from the perspective of the girl. It's all from the mom's perspective.
Yeah.
So
well,
in this movie,
so even though so recently I exposed, because it's October, and whenever Uncle Charlie shows up to his nieces and nephews' houses, wherever they may be, if it's October, and especially if the parents are gone, I'm like, kids, we're watching creepy things and only creepy things. So I put on things like Thriller, Michael Jackson's Thriller, the 13-minute, music video, or which is actually really scary. But then at some point they start dancing, and so the kids are like, "This is funny," and they love it.
Yeah.
But I put on Labyrinth, and even in Labyrinth, there's that moment where, kind of like Bloody Mary or something, where she invokes the Goblin King. Please take my brother away. And my oldest nephew, he kept asking me, he was like, if I say those words, will the Goblin King also take my siblings away? That's terrifying. And I said, Shy, it's just a movie. But at the same time, I wouldn't say those words. You know, I wouldn't go into a mirror and say Bloody Mary or whatever.
Right.
Dude,
Candyman.
even if it's Candyman, whatever it is, even if it's not real, don't tempt it. Do not tempt it. Do not mess where you shouldn't be messing. And that's what these girls do. And it's motivated because the one girl lost her mom, so she's trying to contact her dead mother. And that's cute and all, but it's like
I will say, like just real quick though, I will say that like comparing this movie to the original, that was the scene where it was like, yeah, you can see the different take on it. Because in this movie, we see them actually doing this, and it's very, very on the. I mean, we see them doing it, but part of me is like, okay, we kind of have to, because they do something a little different than what, like, you know, it's typical, which I thought was a nice introduction where she's like doing this hypnotism thing, and they're trying to talk to their mom. But
it's better because you have two girls.
Subtle.
By essence of having two girls, it's different than having seen Regan do it. We didn't need to see her do it. But getting back on what we were talking about, after all that's said and done, just like with Regan when she's being checked out and you know there's nothing wrong with her, the most effective sequences in this movie were the same ones where these girls, having just been found 3 days later and their feet are all burnt up, and you know, there's a series of tests being run on them, and that stuff was so it was very much like this original movie where you feel the pain of the parents, especially when they're being given a rape kit. Yeah. They're being run through those tests, and you know that there aren't going to be any findings, but you're so, oh my God, you're clenching. So those things are effective. Anybody saying this movie is complete trash is technically, and you know me, I'm usually if a movie
you usually say most of the movies
hit the
are
beats,
complete trash.
If they're not hitting the beats, they're usually trash. This movie isn't complete trash. It does derail by the end, because even like I said about the creator, I mean, real quick, let me just click this on here. So we have a series of movies where the third act is what ruins it, including Megan. You know, for me at least, Megan is just like it just derails into a robot fight. The creator is incredible sci-fi, but then the third act is rushed. I said it about even Creed 3. It's like, it's not the worst thing with Creed 3, but the final fight does, you're like, wait, it's over? No, he should get back up at least one or two more times. But no, it's over before it begins.
Well, it's not even that. Remember, also in the Creed 3 movie, we talked about how like that, just the initial third, not the fight, but the initial third act in itself isn't as like complex as you want it to be. Like like Jonathan Major's character doesn't really. You get maybe one scene where he tears him down, where it's like you could see a lot of similarities between Rocky 3 and Creed 3, where Mr. T's character is like not only physically beating Rocky, but also like mentally and emotionally beating him. But we don't really see that because the movie's so focused on like Creed's adoptive mom dying, and it just kind of like, we didn't need that, but it's in there. Talking about this movie though, I am so do we want to talk about initial ranking first? Is that what you're getting to?
Well, I was talking about how, you know, the scenes checking out the girls was great. It was like the perfect rhyme with the original, where it was like with Reagan, it was trying to figure out what was wrong with her. With this, it was these girls have been gone for 3 days, so we're going to run them through vigorous testing. That stuff was fresh, and that was all good. The point I was making is that anybody saying this movie is all bad it's another one of these where it's like 2/3 of it is good. It's good, and not just not just the medical scenes, but then after that, where the parents are noticing problems with their daughters. That stuff was well done. It isn't until the third act where things get wonky, and we'll get to that. But that's just
I
what I want to lay out at
I
first.
Right. Okay. I will say this though. I disagree with you in the regard of saying it's 2/3 good. I would say a half of it's good, at least in my interpretation of when events were taking place.
Yeah.
Because I think that
By the
once
time we get to the exorcism, that's what I'm talking about.
the exorcism, yeah, that part I agree. That part was
Yeah.
not good. That
Yeah.
part was clunky and felt like it was part of a different movie, and it was like it never led
Yeah.
up to that, and it was just garbage. I'm talking about like the moment we get the when we get Helen Brewston's character to come
Chris.
back, right? Chris.
Yeah.
When she comes back, that's when to me the movie starts to really derail. Like I'm like,
Well, that was
feels like
okay.
it's almost halfway through the movie.
You're right in hindsight. When it first was happening, I was like, oh, because you know me, I don't watch trailers. I don't know if she was in the trailer, but when she suddenly came back, I was like, oh, what are we going to do with this? This is interesting. And what it functioned as was she came in specifically to help our dad. What was his name? Do you
Victor.
remember?
You know,
Victor?
hold on, let me just double check. But yeah, I think it's Victor.
But to help Victor,
Yes,
because
Victor.
Victor's the one who's like, uh, this isn't a faith thing, and like he's the atheist, right?
He's the reason why the movie's called Believer. He's the
Yes,
reason why
yeah.
the movie's called Believer. And I think that's the strongest part of the movie, or at least it's trying to be the strongest part of the movie, is that it's like, let's focus on this one character who is struggling with his faith for a very specific reason.
Yeah.
And we eventually we learn everything we need to know about it, but like that was the stuff that I was like, yeah, this is the stuff you should have latched into more. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Hey, let me get the list away for a second.
You want to get your notes out of the way. I can see.
Well, no,
I don't know what you're getting to, but there's so much I want to talk about.
yeah. Well, I can't even remember what I was
brain's
talking
like,
about.
I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
We're
Well,
talking
go
about
ahead, because
when Chris shows up.
Oh yeah. So at first it's like, oh, maybe there'll be a point to this. And in hindsight, there was no point. If her entire role had just been Victor goes to her house and she says, look, whether you like it or not, the devil is real. This all happened to my daughter, and you need to go do X, Y, and Z. For her to be a catalyst for him to get on board with the supernatural, that would have been enough. But instead, what happens is she comes with him. She goes and finds one of the girls, and all that happens is that that possessed girl stabs her eyes out, and then the rest of the movie she's in the hospital. And even during the exorcism, we keep cutting to her as if that's going to be significant, and in the end it's not. And then the final scene is just pointlessly, Regan shows up again and is like, hi, Mom. And she's like, oh, hi. And then they both went and cashed their checks for appearing in the film together.
I was going to talk about this. I will say this. I think when it comes to that character's return, because again, it's not Linda Blair's coming back. It's this character who's the mom.
Yeah.
It does feel like I liked the natural thing that they did with her, where she became a believer of this stuff, because in the original in the book, like her character's an atheist, and then she becomes a believer after the events of this movie. However, I think, and I think this is like I'm trying to find a really great way to express this. I think, okay, like for me, this would have been the equivalent. I'm trying to think of a movie that if they brought back, like I want to say Ghostbusters, but that's not even a good one, because I mean they have done this, and I want to say Star Wars, but let me put it like, okay, let's just say Ghostbusters. Okay, let's just say Ghostbusters for a second. Even though they've made a new reboot sequel, I'm just gonna go with this one. This appearance of this character is like the equivalent of making a Ghostbusters sequel that takes place many years later, but instead of bringing back the Ghostbusters, instead of bringing back or sorry, yeah, instead of bringing back any of the Ghostbusters, we just bring back the secretary. We just bring back Janine. And now Janine is like the most Ghostbuster of all Ghostbusters. And it's like, well, why? What was her significance in the movies specifically? Like, how was she tied to those traumatic events, other than that she was kind of like a very, very secondary character to that? Or even worse would be like if they brought back the EPA guy, but now he's like into, like, he's a believer of the Ghostbusters. Like, how,
Yeah.
like, so strange. So then to bring her back and to like tie her into being like, oh, I'm this believer of this exorcisms, and I'm like the champion of this idea. It's just, there's a part of me that feels like it's like you're trying to use the same formula with Halloween, but it doesn't quite work as well. And I think it would have worked, like, I've seen The Exorcist, so I know this wouldn't work, but it would have worked better if it was a priest, because the priest in the movie dies. Both priests die, unfortunately. Spoilers. It's a very old movie, but you know, if one of those priests had lived, or somebody who was related to,
Well, remember, he
or
did.
something.
He lived until Exorcist 3, and then
Sure, but you know, you get what
that's
I'm
also
saying.
a really old movie,
like,
so he's killed at
like,
the end of that
for
one
me,
too,
I think it would have been more effective if it was like a priest who was actually involved with that exorcism, and
But here's
I don't
here's what I'll say though. She, I guess, becomes something of an exorcist. She's like, I schooled myself. I educated
Okay.
myself on exorcism.
Right.
She tries to exorcise the demon in the girl, and I'm just gonna do it because I can't. I do not know their names. I'm just gonna say black girl and white girl. If you're offended by that, go fuck yourself.
I'm offended.
White girl, black girl. White girl.
Got it.
Chris goes to goes with Victor to into the family of white possessed girl, and she's
Catherine's that character's name. It's Catherine.
Catherine is the girl.
Catherine's the white girl. Angela's the black girl.
Okay, Angela and Catherine. Okay, so that's also, I always use that as a test. If I can remember characters' names, that's like, even in your movie, you know that Pears' name is Pears because it's reiterated enough naturally that you remember it. Like Regan, you cannot forget Regan. Regan. I'll probably switch back and forth, but you do not forget her name because it's used properly a lot. But anyway, so I'm probably even going to Catherine. Okay, so they go to find Catherine. Her family's like, it was interesting because her family's like in turmoil. Like, they're hiding in the kitchen. The dad is in the bathroom, like out of his mind. And then up in the bedroom, possessed Catherine is like going crazy. And Chris goes in there, and Chris kind of attempts an exorcism, and she fails horribly, and she ends up getting her eyes pierced. And but the problem is that I would have been A-okay with Chris being with the team of exorcists at the end. So what essentially happens is that there's a team. It's a theme at some point. It's like you need to get you got to get the exorcist super friends together, and you're all going to try to exorcise this demon at the same time, which ends up being terrible. But my point being that if she would have been with them, if she would have been a part of that, that would have been great. But apparently, because I assume that she just didn't want to do that, because that would require like another week or two of her being part of the cast. And she was like, no, I just want to make an appearance and then disappear. Just like Linda Blair. Linda Blair is like, I just want to make an appearance, cash my check, and move on. So that's why this movie fails ultimately. But if you're going to introduce Chris, have her just appear briefly and say, hey, this is real. The devil is real. Exorcism is real. You better get on board with it now. That would have been effective. But instead, she stays in the plot, and then it doesn't pay off at all. So you're like, this is crap. Okay. This is just crap.
On that point, real quick though, when you say that, and then I'm thinking about the movie, I'm like, oh, okay. I wonder if the original script had her in place of the nun, in place of Anne. So remember Anne. So basically what happens is this movie introduces a lot of characters for different reasons. There's other things I want to complain about, but for instance, Anne's the neighbor Anne's their neighbor, Angela and Victor's neighbor, who, like, in the beginning of the movie, we have this little thing about taking out the garbage, and she's just like, "You guys didn't take," like, she's the annoying neighbor. She's like, "You didn't take your
But she's
trash
right.
after again.
She's correct though. Don't leave your garbage cans out.
Don't
But
leave your
anyway.
you left your garbage cans out, whatever." And Victor's just like, "Oh, I don't have time to deal with this," and like it's just a thing. And then
Well, he blames
slowly
his daughter.
she gets
He's
more
like,
involved.
you were supposed to do it, because they're
but she
kind
gets
of
more
because
involved.
mom's dead. Because mom's dead, they're kind of like a pseudo couple, right?
Right.
Like even though they're father and daughter, it's like you
Yeah.
have to kind of be mom in this relationship, and
Right.
I got to be dad.
Right.
It's complicated.
It's anyway, Anne ends up becoming like this. She becomes more involved with the family because she's at the hospital because she's a nurse, and so she sees what's going on with the family and stuff. So slowly, there's a point in the movie where there's this big culmination. She comes out and she said, "Look, I was going to be a nun, and I didn't tell anybody my nun name, and on top of that, I had an abortion. I didn't tell anybody about it, and that's the reason why I didn't become a nun, because I broke my oath. And the demon, your daughter, told me the name that I was going to use, and knew that I was gonna have the name of my daughter that I was gonna give or whatever."
What other movie
that
this
scene-
year dealt with that? What other movie did that same kind of had a similar
other-
thing going on?
Was one of the other? Was it the Nun?
Evil Dead
No?
Rise had a similar thing where it had like an abortion theme to it.
Right.
And so all that stuff was very effective where she's talking to Victor and she's like, "Hey, nobody knew about this. Nobody."
Right.
So your daughter had intimate knowledge of me, which just, if you believe me, then something's going on. Something
She becomes the
supernatural is going on.
catalyst. She becomes the catalyst for Victor to meet
Because she gave
Catherine.
him the book from
Chris.
Chris. Yeah.
Right,
She's
right.
like, read
So-
this book.
so
And
because of all-
then
yeah,
the
yeah.
help me thing, where Reagan had help me carved into her chest, I
Right.
believe, and the girls had.
So there's
had
like all of that.
straight-
That's great. But what
Yeah.
I'm getting at, I guess what I'm getting at is I do wonder if there was an original script, like an older draft of the script, or because of whatever Chris's demands were, that she was supposed to lead that charge instead of giving Anne so much to do in this movie. And because when we get to let's just jump, like we need to jump because we keep putting it off, but we need to talk about like what I think is one of the worst parts of the movie is the third act of the film for a number of reasons. I will say the only positive thing I could say is that it's sort of, in a weird way, it is foreshadowed with how when they're in the hospital and all the doctors are asking him those questions and stuff, there's the cacophony of sound essentially. Like all of this stuff is not said as line. It's almost like they're not necessarily lines for like an actor to speak. It's almost just like sound. And that sound you can see the effect of the sound with the parents and really just the parents and how they're hearing all these things. Like, do you feel this? Do you hear this? And then when we get to this last scene, it's this circus, this like just the super friends of exorcism all joining forces, and call them super friends is such a, like, I wouldn't even call them that. It's just like the misfits of exorcism coming together, because none of them are like, I guess, and I guess maybe the filmmakers were thinking like, oh, we should put a bunch of people that you wouldn't expect to be exorcists together. But I feel like that in itself was not, because it's just so much crap at the end that I just feel like it never, it's not as impactful. It's like I would have, it's one of the lessons.
But it also doesn't work. They say they're like, you got to get the community together, because church is about community, right? So if church is about community, you got to get the whole community behind this effort, and all of your powers combined will lead to saving these girls. And it just doesn't work. It's just like,
it's like none of it.
Oh, that was stupid, by the way. None of that worked.
It's all because it's like, okay, so just to lay it out, you're right. Like it's as the movie goes on, we find Catherine, her parents. Catherine's the girl, the white girl, as you keep saying. Catherine, her parents come to this.
As you keep saying, you racist fuck.
You racist piece of junk. So her parents I censor myself real hard there. So
Oh,
her
I
parents,
should. McCurdy and I keep trying to not swear, and then I come in and I'm just like,
we have yeah.
I'm like, this swear is brought to you by Two Hearted IPA.
So her parents, and you get the sense they're kind of like not just Baptists, but they're evangelical, like Christians, like very
Yeah.
just the kind of folks that you would see, you know, like praying like this with their hands up and like they would listen to church music. And then they have their pastor who doesn't have anything bad. He's just there. There's nothing like, they don't really go too hard on him at all or anything negative. They're just like, he's the pastor at the church. So they bring him in, and maybe you get a sense of that, like this pastor likes the attention that this whole situation is given on the church, but it's very subtle. Like I don't necessarily buy if that's exactly what was going on, but I kind of felt like it was. Then we have the other neighbor. So they have Anne, and then there's another neighbor that's next to Victor and Angela, and he's like a guy that I wasn't sure was gay or not. Like I was just like, is this the gay neighbor?
And you're like,
or her friend?
This
and
is
then
just
and
a
then
friend
the scene,
of Victor's.
friend
and
of
what
them.
is his significance?
Right. And you never
He's
find
just
out.
a guy.
But then
he had a weird connection to like a bunch of voodoo priestesses.
That's the weirdest part. That was the weirdest part of the movie.
He's like, hey, bro, I brought all these voodoo priestesses over to bless your house.
He kept saying that. He's like, this is normal. This is okay. And you're like, dude, you broke into a man's house with a bunch of voodoo witches?
No, but it's okay. It's okay. And then he straight up says, that was one of my favorite parts of the movie was when he goes, hey man, I'm just trying to help. And Victor goes, get the fuck out. And he goes, okay. Like
but that scene in itself is just like the weirdest, like left turn of the whole movie, which part of me was like, okay with like the voodoo witch thing. And only because, and it's
supposed to echo the opener.
Which we skipped. And I do like it was the thing. I liked they took some time. And because the story, at least I think a cleaner version would have made that beginning even more impactful. But they took some time. They were like, okay, we're going to take a real life event, which was the earthquakes in Haiti, which a lot of people would know that like Haiti is a very poor country. They're not up to code with a lot of their buildings as far as earthquakes go. And so there's a scene where basically you find Victor and Victor's wife, and they're in Haiti on vacation or work. They're not quite sure. He's a photographer. They're taking photos. And she's pregnant, very pregnant. She even gets blessed. So there's a blessing that happens, and they bless their baby. They spit water on her feet, which was the weirdest thing I saw in the movie. One of the weirdest things you see in the movie. And then the earthquake happens, and she gets stuck in the rubble, and then they get her out, and she's going to die. And the doctors tell her, like, look, they tell Victor's like, either your wife lives or your baby lives. And so we obviously know the answer to what happens to that one. And it's left just like lingering. And so then when we get to the end, out of the blue, we get I don't know if you would say voodoo priest. I don't know what the specific correct terminology for what their religion
witch
is.
Doctor.
Right. So witch doctor, voodoo priest, whatever you want to call her, she comes and she's helping. And there's a part of me that's like, was there a version of this where it's just her? Where it's just, instead of like the Catholic priest, it's just her as the exorcist? But so she comes and she's a part of the team, and she's the only one who seems to do anything effective. It's strange, but she seems to be the only person to do something that seems like it's working against the things. And then, okay, so then we have her. Then we have the nun. We have Anne, who's like, I'll do this. I was a nun, or was going to be a nun, and I'm a nurse, but I'm a believer, and I'm gonna fight the devil, and I'm gonna do this. And you're like, okay, good for you, Anne. Nurse lady, and she also brings something to the table because she's got the heart monitors and all the stuff. So medically reasoning, like, okay, that makes sense why Anne's there, right? And then okay, the biggest weird turn of the movie, because again, this is based off The Exorcist. The Catholic Church just like cowards up. They just are like, the one Catholic priest in this entire movie comes and he's like, sorry, I can't help you guys. The diocese said that that they need psychological help, and they're like, what? And
have you seen their faces? Like they're clearly possessed by devils. You're telling me this franchise that like, and then this year we get a movie like Pope's Exorcist and after researching that movie, you know for a fact that there are people in the Catholic Church that were very, very heavily
for, you know, exorcisms for various reasons. And you're telling me, knowing that knowledge and then seeing this movie, you're telling me that like the Catholic Church would not come to help these people. And so he's like, doesn't help. And he's in the car praying. And then finally he comes out. And then that was when the movie was like, you get a sense like everyone's like, oh, he's gonna do something. He's really gonna bring the power of God. And then all of a sudden he gets killed. And you're like,
He just
okay.
dies. Yeah. And you're like,
dies.
oh, like that is a turning point where you're like, okay, this movie is just gonna fall back on shock value and not meaning. It's not really gonna care.
It just
So
felt like the filmmakers were like,
that was a big sign.
yeah, that was and I think some people have said this, but like that was the moment where you're like, oh, this movie hates Catholicism. Like, and I didn't want to be like, felt like I was being offended, but I was just like, at the same time, I'm like, okay, it's just weird to be like, this is the movie that took like this is the franchise that made exorcism a thing that tons of horror movies do, and they use Catholicism as kind of like the forefront fighters of these things, such as the movies like Nun and Pope's Exorcist and all these other ones we've probably seen over the years. And then you're just gonna like backseat the Catholic Church and just be like, no, the Catholic Church is evil or bad or whatever, so we're gonna make them look stupid in this movie. And I was like, really?
Yeah.
Like,
Whereas the first movie was about the priest. It was specifically about a priest struggling with his faith. So and then that same character by the end of the movie sacrifices his life on behalf of Regan, which is a big reason why the sequel is such a piece of trash, because it undermines the significance of the sacrifice he makes. So big spoiler alert, at the end of the first movie, the old priest has just been killed off camera. Young priest comes in, Damien comes in, and he grabs Regan and he says, come into me. He's talking to Pazuzu and he says, come into me. And the demon goes from Regan into him, and then he kills himself. He jumps out the window and he dies. So he's sacrificing his life to save this young girl. But then in the sequel, it's like, well, Pazuzu's still inside of Regan. You're like, what? No, that doesn't make sense. How could Pazuzu still be in? No, that's you're undermining the sacrifice. Anytime any sacrifice is undermined, I'm immediately just like, no, what are you doing? And a lot of people would say this about like Alien 2 to Alien 3. If you're just gonna kill everybody who survived Alien 2, then you're just like, what are you doing? You're ruining. And I don't think that's as bad, because that's just setting up the plot for Alien 3, whatever. But when the whole idea is this priest sacrificed his life for the sake of this young girl, but then that sacrifice means nothing. It's just like this is a shameless cash grab at that point. So it's a shame. Right. So here though, none of that's there. The priest just comes in because he's like, oh, I changed my mind. I'm going to help. And then he dies. So you're like, it's pretty wild.
To be fair,
lame. It just ends up being lame.
It is lame. He comes in and then he gets his head twisted around, because that's the thing, the cliche thing with these movies that we have to do.
It's a callback to the first movie. There was a guy who fell down the director of the movie that Chris is in the first movie. That director dies by falling down those steps, and his head turns back. And
you never see that. You never see any of that play out. And I actually, going back, I'm like rewatched that, and I was like, that is really effective how they played that whole thing out, because you kind of have to put the pieces together, because she comes in and the window's open. She's like, hey, why did you leave the windows open? She's talking to the maid, and the maid's like, no, the director guy, your boss came, and and I had watch her because I had to go get this thing. And she's like, oh, okay. And then at the same time, we see all of like the sirens and stuff, and so we're not sure what happens, and then it like kind of comes together, and you're like, oh my gosh. And again, it's from the mom's perspective, so there's a lot of stuff that we don't see that happens, and I think it's more effective. This movie, let's just talk about that.
No, go ahead.
That circus scene though, like they call it a circus scene. Like it's just so over the top, and just so many people like yelling prayers, and like I know, like we talked about when we did the Nun 2, you were complaining about like, oh, they make the Catholic Catholic, they make religion look like it's magic, but like this movie tries to do something similar, but makes it look like it's the goofiest thing in the world, and it just doesn't have any impact. And then in fact, on top of that, it's like it really doesn't. It's just like, okay, well then what was the whole point? And then to realize that
what was the point of getting everybody together? What was the point of being like, get the community together? Where what it then comes down to is this devil inside of these girls, which we are to I don't think they ever say Pazuzu, do they? But we're to
no, they
assume
never
that
say.
it's
I don't think they
Pazuzu,
ever say Pazuzu.
because Chris, when she confronts, it's like Chris confronting Catherine / the demon in Catherine. It's like, oh, hi again. We've met before. So we're to assume that it's Pazuzu, but they never used
I
the
think
name.
that was a bad idea on the part of the
Yeah.
filmmakers, because okay, like this goes down a whole other rabbit hole with like writing fiction for possessions and stuff. But like, I don't even remember what movie or what this was, but there is talks of like, if you know the name of the demon, you can get the demon out. And I don't remember
Yeah.
what movie that was from, but that's always been like a thing. And like there are a lot of these movies where they like give real actual demons names. Like there's an actual book, and I think I talked about in I think it was The Nun too, or one of them.
Fallen is
like
one of
Valak.
those. Fallen's a big one, where in the movie Fallen, the Denzel movie, he goes to a cabin and he finds the name of the specific demon written on the wall. And then once he has the name, he's got some kind of power over. If you know the demon's name, you have some.
And I do
power
wonder
over
if maybe they didn't want to dive down that rabbit hole of like, oh, there's different names for demons. So just to make it simpler, like she says, oh, we've met before. It's like, because I don't think in the movie they say Pazuzu in the first film, but I think that was always the intention from what's in the book. I don't know if they say Pazuzu in the movie, but in the book they do. They clarify it definitely in the book.
The first movie, I believe they do. They definitely do in the second movie, but I think at some point you get Pazuzu
I just saw it
first.
recently. I just don't ever remember anybody calling anybody the name of the demon. So anyway, just going back to like the end, I think what it really comes down to for me is like this is what it is. Okay, so in screenwriting, if I had John Truby's book, I'd pull that one out. John Truby talks about how usually in a movie, that like the winner of the hero, right? The hero of the film, his whole his argument, if his argument wins, that's how like you want that triumphant win. Like all the different characters are going to have their own arguments or their own beliefs on a certain subject, which is the theme of the movie. And whatever the main characters is, like they have to beat the other characters, and there's a whole list of things from like the four corner oppositions and all this other stuff that he talks about. But I think why I think the end of the movie is really undermined is because there's an argument that's made in the movie by Chris that's saying like we need to bring, it's about community, it's about the people, the family that you bring around you, and that's how you're going to destroy this demon. But when you watch that scene, that's not how it really happens, or at least how I interpret it, because the movie already opens with this scene where the mom gets blessed by these I don't know if you call them witch doctors, priest, whatever, religious folks in Haiti, and she's blessed, and there's a scarf that like she had that becomes like kind of a little MacGuffin piece throughout the film, where Angela's like, I want this thing for my mom, and she gets caught taking it from her dad and stuff, and eventually at the very end of the movie, he brings that little thing back and gives it to her, like puts it on her, and is like, no, I love you, and he's pouring himself out to her, and then that's really the moment when they at least get Angela back. And so I think what really it comes down to why the ending is so ineffective is because the movie does all this build up, especially with Chris, to say, hey, it's about community, it's about all these things. And then that thing that they're doing is kind of a huge false hope where it's not really that effective. And then what ends up being the most effective is something that happened in the beginning of the movie. Is just is this, but like it kind of attaches itself to like this blessing that happened really early on in the movie. And that's where I feel like this is kind of in the same vein of like how the Nun 2, the reason why the nun is able to the good nun in that movie is able to stop the demon is because she is actually a family member. It's like a Deus Machina kind of ending where it's like she was a family member of this saint, so therefore she's able to destroy the demon. And I think with this movie, it's like you make this argument that you say, you know, people are gonna like the people around you are gonna stop this demon, or they're the reason that exorcism's gonna happen, and then it doesn't. And that's where
And
I
the
feel like
reason why,
really,
though,
really
the
just
reason
kinda
why
ruins it.
is because out of nowhere, the demon says, you have to choose. I have two girls, and you, all you super friends, everything you're doing is stupid and
Right.
ineffective. And even though we're pretending like having a big group, having a team of exorcists is going to do anything, suddenly that idea goes out the window as the demon says, you have to pick. I'll let you pick one of these girls. I'm going to take her soul to hell. The other one will live. And then what happens from there, the correct thing happens is that so Victor and the mom of Catherine, they look at each other and they go, we're not going to pick. And that is knowing the devil. The devil isn't exactly going to lay out a satisfactory conundrum. There's going to Satan is the great deceiver. His devils are liars. If you choose, it's not going to work out for you. So the best thing you can do is not choose at all. And then based on what he just said, he's like, the whole idea is that in the beginning of the movie, Victor was faced with a choice. The doctors said in Haiti, or as you say, Haitian, in Haiti, they said you can either your wife is going to live or your daughter is going to live. And this is great. I love when it comes to possession movies, what you have is a devil that calls out your sins. I love that. So early on, we get the devil calls out that the nurse had an abortion, and
Right.
nobody knew about it. It was a secret, but the devil knows your sins. That's a great theme. So he says, he reveals, and this is what I said in my opener, where you take this intimate knowledge of people and you apply it to the exorcism scenes, and it's always the case. Like I think even in the original, or there's some where it's like they're always being called out. Their sins are always being called
Well, we
out,
talked
and
about it
that's
in
where it's
Pope's
effective.
Exorcist. Remember we talked about this in Pope's Exorcist. There's a scene where he tells the other priest before they're about to go do the exorcism. He's like, "Tell me all your sins, because I need to know that, because he's going to use
Yeah,
that
because
against us."
he's going to use
And
it
he's
against
like,
you.
"When was your last confession?" It's like, "Well, it was a while ago."
Yeah,
And then he's like, "Okay, all your, just like quick version, here you go." And then it turns
yeah.
out it's still effective against them. But yeah, I think even in that regards, I wish we got a little like I know it would have made the movie longer, but I would have probably traded all of the gobbledygook of the extended prayers that didn't really that seemed to fall on false ears. False ears. That's not a phrase.
I
But you
could
know what
have
I'm saying?
used another 20 minutes.
I would have traded all of the cacophony of prayers with
Yeah,
like maybe the priest aiming at the Baptist priest and saying, or a Baptist pastor and saying, "Oh, you think you're clean, like you did this," or the
yeah.
dad or the mom, like those things I would have appreciated. But like we yeah, it's just a very untriumphant ending to a movie that
What
feels
I'm
like it
yeah, so
should.
so what I'm getting at is that all of that stuff, that's what an exorcism movie should do, because the devil will, your sins will find you out. That stuff's always very effective. And so what it came down to was that he then reveals that we assume, because we assume as an audience that he chose his daughter over his wife, because that is the right thing to do. If you have to choose between your child and your wife, it's a terrible decision to make, but you should choose your child. That is the proper choice. He selfishly wanted his wife, selfishly. Because even your wife, if it came down to it, any good person is going to say, take me. And that's the essence of the ending of the first movie, right? Is that this older man says, spare this little girl, come into me. So, and anybody worth their salt is going to give their life for a younger person. Well, whatever story it may be, Titanic, women and children first, whatever it is. If you are a piece of crap, if you choose yourself over a member of the younger generation. So it's revealed that he didn't do that. It's revealed that he told the doctor, save my wife, forget about my daughter. And that's a huge revelation. And it's very effective in a movie like this, because then you can have both the demon version of the girl and the girl herself being like, Dad, why would you do that? And as we talked about, that's kind of the essence of these movies, is that usually Evil Dead style, you kind of oscillate back and forth between the possessed form of the person and the real person. And sometimes that's blurred where you don't know who you're talking to. And that's where the human beings are being manipulated. Hence, you need to confess beforehand. So what it comes down to then at that point is this demon says you have to pick, just like you picked before between your wife and daughter. Now I'm going to give you the same choice. You have to pick between one of the girls will live. Well, obviously at that point, we know that whoever is chosen, it's the other girl who will survive. Whoever you choose is going to die. Just like when he said, save my wife, and his wife died and his daughter lived. Here we have the same choice. You have to pick. So we know immediately as an audience, we know that if he says, save my daughter, his daughter's going to die and the other girl is going to live. So the other dad is unaware of that. So the dad almost immediately says, I choose you, Catherine. I choose you. And then immediately Catherine is killed. And Catherine and what?
Catherine and Angela.
Angela. And then Angela immediately is unpossessed and everything's great. And so I'm watching this and I'm going, okay. This would have worked if you would have built up both girls. If both girls had a backstory. Instead, we only get the backstory of Angela. We know about Angela and her mom and her dad, and how now it's like a single dad with a daughter. And so we're kind of automatically rooting for them. Whereas Catherine's backstory is just like,
they don't give her,
person.
I will even say this, even the stuff that is in Catherine's back, as far as her story, because we do learn a lot about her through different scenes with the family and the parents and stuff. But and I liked the contrast between the two families, because obviously black and white, but we also get like,
literally black and white.
Dad. We get literally black and white, but we get single dad. We get single dad. We get parents. We get a only child, and then we get a child with siblings, essentially. So you have and then obviously, like when you see their house, you're like, oh, they have a little more money, and then you see a house, not as much, but it's not a bad house or anything like that. And so you do see you see some differences between the two, for sure. And I liked the contrast, but I will also say the movie doesn't do any favors for Catherine's family, because everything that her parents do is kind of like annoying, because it's almost like that. What's the thing I'm looking for? It's kind of like that first world problems annoyance of everything that they kind of go through, and the things they kind of talked about, and like even when they go to
see
church,
right away that the dad is very emotional. Like, remember, the dad's the one who, the cops are like, sir, you need to remain calm, and we're trying to find your daughter.
Right.
Yeah, and he's like kicking over trash cans, and he's like, find my daughter.
They never do. Never do any. It's very real, but it's like they never do any favors for that family to make you on that side. So the movie just doesn't.
So by the time that she's the one who gets it,
right,
and Angela's fine, you're like, well, wait a second. If this all came down to a choice, there was no weight to that choice. The choice ended up being obvious. If it was truly 50-50, then there would be, for an audience, it'd be like, oh my God, do they actually have to choose, or are they going to defeat the choice? But no, in the end, it's like, well, hang on. This demon this demon / the writers of the movie stacked it in the favor of Angela and Victor, right? So there's no payoff. Therefore, there's no emotional payoff to where he's like, my daughter. It's like, okay, well, you kind of
it's
spoiled
the plot
this.
armor. She's basically armored up with plot. Like it's the
Yes.
plot armor that the movie has given her, because we're already in the beginning of the movie. We're putting so much interest in this one character versus the other.
Yeah.
So anyway, you know what? I don't know what else, like any gripe. The only other the one gripe was like the this is fine. This is This is normal. This is fine. We broke into your house to bless. It's fine. This is normal. That's my favorite. Like,
and then
favorite,
get the F
not
out.
favorite
Yeah.
part.
But so
and then,
let
the body and the
let me
blood
cover
scene,
some stuff then.
The
body and the blood. The body and the blood was trying to trump the scene. Yeah, the body and the blood. That was supposed to be an echo of the piano party scene in the first movie, which is very creepy. When Reagan just comes in and she tells a guy, "You're going to die," and then she just pisses on the carpet. She's standing there and she just pisses. And so it's very creepy because it adds to this whole thing of this poor woman just has this sick daughter and nobody knows what's going on. And we know that she's possessed, but they don't know what's going on. So it's very creepy. Whereas this, as all modern sequels go, it's like, well, we have to take that scene and we got to make it bigger. So how about she walks into an entire church congregation and starts screaming about the body and the blood and like freaking out. That stuff was less effective than when she's just sitting in the pew. She's just sitting in a church pew, and she's like this.
She's like, look,
and her siblings, her siblings are looking at her.
Frightened of
her. They're looking at her, and she's like,
yeah, or she's like playing with her feet.
Yes,
okay,
and that was simple
all
and
of that
effective.
Stuff. All of that stuff, though, like it reminded me of like real life stuff, because it did feel like because I'm a parent. I go to church, and a lot of times, like, my kids act up and stuff. But it does remind me of times like, and I don't know, I don't have a specific instance in the top of my head, but it does remind me of like when you see a family who maybe has a child in their family that may have some mental disorder or something, and they're acting up, and it's like embarrassing for them, and it's like, and some people are used to it and some people aren't used to it. And it kind of reminded me of that, because like there's some like thread of realism at those scenes, but then of course it goes to the body and the blood, really creepy stuff. But yeah, I agree. I think all like her playing with her feet and like her toes and all that stuff was like, oh, it's so like, it was so like
simple,
good.
But effective.
That was good stuff. Really effective stuff. Okay, so can we go?
Angela has the same stuff. Angela has like just like even down to her dad. I really enjoyed the scene where his daughter, the only person in his life, is gone for 3 days, and then she comes back, and so he's happy. He's a dad who's like, oh, my daughter's back. This is great. So he makes her breakfast and brings her breakfast in bed, including ice cream, which was just kind of sweet, where he's like, even Rocky Road doesn't get you out of bed. Like, it's a sweet scene. But then he goes in there and she's like comatose. And then he realizes that she's pissed herself, echoing, that scene in the first movie. And so it's so effectively creepy, where you have this dad who thinks that he's out of the woods. He thinks the worst is behind them. And he then has to, you're like, no, it's not done. She is haunted. And all that stuff is so effective. And that's why anybody saying this movie is 1000% trash. It's like, the movie really is effective up until the final exorcism scene, unfortunately. But all that stuff, you really feel for the dad. Just like in the first movie, you're really feeling for this mom who just wants answers and can't get it. So then it works when he after that starts to realize, maybe this is over my head, and he seeks out Chris, and he actually goes to her home. So here's where I'll complain about stupid things. So I wrote the Exorcist sequel stuff. What?
I'm kidding. Just go on. Sorry.
Well, I didn't hear you. But the Exorcist sequel stuff was spot on at first. Her purpose in the plot was great at first, but then it was short-lived, and then it was pointless in the end. It was absolutely pointless. So there was no need for her. But I mean, it was as pointless as the cabin scenes were in Evil Dead Rise, right? Where it's like, well, this is Evil Dead, so we got to have a cabin scene in here, right? Even though it has nothing to do with the movie, we have to appeal to the franchise. So, and even to the point where during the exorcism, they kept cutting to Chris in the hospital, and you're like, okay, how is this going to pay off? And it never did. Other than her literally getting a payoff in real life.
Right.
But one of the cheapest phrases, one of the worst lines of the movie was Chris talking to Victor and saying, "Hey, dude, this is real, and you got to wrap your head around this. I know you're an atheist, but you can't be an atheist anymore. You got to wrap your head around the fact that Satan is real." And personally, me, frankly, I think that the majority of atheists are comforted by atheism, because to actually believe in the devil is very frightening. So it's very comforting to go, well, if God isn't real, Satan isn't either, and therefore I have nothing to worry about. It's a very terrifying thing to realize that the devil is out there. I think most atheists are comforted by just being like, he's not. No, he's not. But that's I'll leave that over here. When it comes to Chris, though, she has one of the cheapest lines in this movie, where she mentions how these two priests came to her house to solve this problem for her. You know, I see your face. You see where I'm going.
I'm just
You
like
see where I'm going.
I need to put a finger on the chart, the Chucky Ranch. Hold on, wait, hold up. I still have it. I never got rid of it. I still have it to this day. Here we go, everybody.
Okay.
Welcome back,
Okay.
Chucky Rants. Because
Okay.
I know exactly the thing you're talking about, and I also kind of
Yes.
like I groaned a little bit, to be honest. I did
Yes.
groan, but it was more because I was
and
like,
let me lay it out. Let me explain
all right,
why you groaned.
lay it out for us.
Let me
Mr.
lay it out,
Rants.
because she says specifically, she says they didn't let me in the
They
room.
didn't, like, why weren't you involved? It's like, they didn't let me into the thing. Why didn't they let you into the thing?
And she says, because I'm
I'm a
not a
woman.
member of the patriarchy. And immediately, the reason even you,
I
Mr.
groaned.
Progressive
I
McCurdy, the reason even
groaned.
you groan is because that's not why she wasn't invited. If you go back and watch the original movie, here, let me just bring this back here. Wait,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
oh my God, so close.
We're really
If you go
into
back
it.
and watch the
Whoa.
original movie, the whole time she's a mess, because any parent would be an absolute mess because their child is inexplicably
I pretty
possessed
much
by
felt the
Satan.
same thing. I felt the
So,
same way because I'm like, I had just watched the movie and I was like,
yeah,
that's like, wait, you're telling me that's the because I'm like, no, like you were freaking out and they were like, no, get her out of
okay.
here. You
So
don't need to be in here.
subtract exorcism and insert surgery. If your
Right.
daughter had brain cancer and you had two doctors who just so happened to be male operating on her, any family member, mother, father, anybody, would be removed from the room, because the whole time they'd be like, oh my God, you're cutting her scalp open. You're cutting her head open. Oh my God, her brains. The first thing any doctor does is say, get them the hell out of here, because family members emotionally cannot handle watching a surgery or whatever it may be, let alone an exorcism where you're like splashing holy water
Right.
on their face and it's burning. And, the first thing you would do is you would say, get mom out of here. The whole movie, she's screaming at doctors. It's very understandable. Everybody watching can sympathize with this woman who is like, just somebody fix my daughter. I have like 100 doctors and none of them can fix her. So it's incredibly frustrating for her to say, why weren't you involved in the exorcism? Is no different than saying, why weren't you involved in the surgery to remove your daughter's brain cancer? Because you're not a fucking doctor, you retard. Like, it's unbelievable that she would say that it was sexism that was the root cause for why she didn't partake in the exorcism of her daughter. It's so insultingly stupid. And I'm like, who wrote that? Who is responsible for putting that in there? Because that's one of those things where I just go, that's something that single-handedly could put this in the realm of trash. I don't care if 2/3 of it was really good and creepy and effective. The moment she uttered that line, I was like, oh, so whoever wrote this didn't understand the first movie. That is only appealing to today's sociopolitics and goes to show that they have no idea what they're talking about. And then I was like, okay, throw this movie in the trash. That's a stupid line. It's irresponsible. It's ridiculous. And that mom, you think that in the first movie, they were like, ma'am, we're going to go in there. You shouldn't come with because some crazy stuff's going to happen. And guess what happened? Both priests died. They both gave their lives. And she's like, those sexist bastards. It's like, you cunt. You are a fucking cunt for uttering that line. Like that was so inexcusable that I was just like, yeah, that the moment she said that, I was like, this movie sucks. That was the turning point for me. And then from there on, the movie sucked. So where do you want to rank it?
Throw up your list.
Boom.
Because I did have a thought when I saw when we were talking about it. I think here's the thing. I think Megan overall is a better movie than this.
Yeah.
So I actually would probably put it next to Barbie. Actually, now that I'm looking at this list, it is extremely effective. Here's the thing. Let me lay it out why I would say that. Some of it, I'm gonna say it's not because of your beliefs on Barbie, because I do think Barbie's not a bad movie, but it is a messy third act. Whatever, we're not gonna go down that road.
Barbie doesn't exist. Barbie, in my view, Barbie should be a lot lower. So I pretend
triggers you,
where it is,
but I think
pretend
it's still a much better. Okay, on the same note of Barbie, though, I think the way in which it's directed and the way in which it is every aspect of it that doesn't necessarily involve particularly the script or the story or how the end of the movie happens is very high level stuff. And I do appreciate this movie for its subtlety. I think it is very effective when it needs to be. It doesn't do any goofy stuff like other movies like we've seen, like The Pope's Exorcist or Evil Dead Rises, or even The Nun 2, as far as the kind of the same genre and same supernatural type aspects. However, I think it definitely, as we've kind of said, is like the ending of this movie really, really undermines a good chunk of the good stuff in this movie. So that's where it kills itself. But I do think the way in which it's made is a lot better than a lot of these other movies on that are on the bottom part of this list. So that's where I'm kind of like, I think it would probably just on like we've said outclassed before. I think on the outclassed spectrum of things, I would probably put it somewhere near Barbie, above, below, somewhere on that area. Because I think when I look at Missing, again, I've always gone back to Missing and Megan. I think when I come to those movies, I think you and I are maybe just a little far apart on Megan, but I do think Megan as a whole doesn't necessarily undermine its ending as far as the robot fight goes, because it's still like it's something they set up. It's something that is representative of like her and the characters, as well as like how how that whole movie is just about like having to become a mom or be or family in those regards. And it like the theme and everything is very well aligned like throughout that whole movie. I think in the same way as Missing, I think Missing's a little bit closer, because I do think that third act is a little, I kind of agree with you a little bit more on Missing, where it's like, yeah, Missing's ending's a little messy and how they go about it, because that movie's very effective. You're very much on the edge of your seat for a good chunk of that movie.
It twists and turns in a good way.
It twists and turns very well, but I think the ending of it is just kind of like, it's still there, but it's a little messy. And then that kind of brings us to The Machine, where I could, that's where I'm starting to see this, where we're somewhere in this level. I think at its highest, maybe above The Machine. I think at its lowest, I don't know. I mean, there's Scream 6, there's Mario, there's Dumb Money.
Let me take over then, because kind of where I'm at is I'm looking at above or below Scream, and I'm thinking maybe I'm thinking maybe just below Scream, because what I start to look at when it comes to these franchise movies is how effectively
That's not a bad spot.
when it
Oh,
when it comes to specifically when it comes to how they operate within their own franchise. So I said repeatedly, Scream 6 is the weakest Scream movie. Go watch that episode. It is the most piss poor of Scream movies. Indiana Jones is not when it comes to Indiana Jones. It's like it's got its faults,
it
but
is the second
it's
worst. It's near the
yeah.
bottom of the barrel, but it's not the worst.
Yeah, whereas with this movie, this is like effective for most of it and then just like becomes really crappy by the end. It's not the mess that something like Blue Beetle is. Um I'm kind of in the realm of like Indiana Jones is better. Like I think Indiana Jones is
Okay,
better. I
I
think
will.
Scream is like Scream. I could
I don't think
maybe like
Scream's
even
better than this
even
one.
even so far as like there's a full arc between the sisters in Scream is enough for me to say Scream is better, and that this would be just above Super Mario Bros, which is like, uh, I mean,
We're in the
the
realm.
Mario
We're
the
in the
Mario
realm
movie
because
is yeah
here's just where I'm gonna fight you a little bit. Again, Scream 6 has continuously, when we get to any movie that gets over there, I always am like, this movie's better than that movie because of this reason. And this reason alone is that even though there may be a whole arc with the sister, I think my biggest complaint about that movie is there's a lot of kill scenes that don't end up in actual deaths. So they
yeah
really kind of they're always continuously like, oh yeah, like death is almost meaningless in this movie, where multiple times a character should have died to make a bigger impact in that movie, and they don't. And it's like, oh, actually they're okay. Oh, actually they're okay. And it
yeah
happens more than once to the point where it's like it really is like, okay, is this supposed to be a scary movie? And that's where I'm like, I think when I compared this to Scream, I think this is a better directed movie. I think this is a better it takes its time a little
yeah.
bit more. I think it
One
makes
of
the
my
scares
favorite
are way
moments.
more effective in this movie, even if people don't die. Even
Yeah,
if not as many people die in this movie, I think the scares are way more effective in this movie than they are in Scream.
yes.
So I
One of
would
my
say
favorite
it's
moments
above
is
Scream 6.
their uh because what you need and what I kind of wish would have happened is that you have at first you have the exorcism scene is this weird cacophony of noise of all these people praying and screaming and there's all this craziness, but then it does cut and suddenly we slow down. Suddenly they're taking a break. And that's what you needed. Even to the point where the dad walks out and he goes up to the Catholic priest in the car and he says, "Hey, the war is inside." You know, you needed that moment. You needed a chill break. I wish there would have been a second chill break. And
Yeah.
like because this movie easily could have added 20 minutes and that 20
Oh
minutes
yeah.
should have gone into the exorcism scene to make it as emotion like just like Creed should have added 10 minutes to the fight. It would have been great. So when you reach that point though, when you reach the chill out, right? So you got the big all the noise, then it cuts and everybody's chill. One of the best just little moments of the movie was that Victor is sitting in the room with the two possessed girls and they're tied back to back in chairs and he's just looking at them and just at the same time both of them just turn and look at him, and it was very reminiscent of something like Evil Dead Rise where the mom through the peephole, right? Just to take a moment to let that evil just look you in the face, and even though it can't reach out and grab you, it can still manipulate you emotionally. Like those moments were effective. So as I've been saying all night, anybody saying this movie is because who was it? I think Cordy Manor was sending some in their Discord was sending some reviews from something, maybe Reddit or something, saying this
Right.
movie is like a absolute garbage, or saying that it's even worse than The Exorcist 2. No, this movie's better than The Exorcist 2. Like
Yeah.
it's definitely better than The Exorcist 2. Uh uh Anybody saying that it's worse is being hyper emotional. They're being very reactive. This movie is very effective up until that third act, and so I'm with you in saying that it's better than Scream 6 so far as Scream 6 has that character arc, but this has the effective first 2/3 of the movie. And
I
by
think,
that I
and
mean
that's
like everything up
and
until the
even
exorcism
then,
scene.
I also will also say I think there is still a good arc with the dad and the daughter. And I think the thing that if it were me, if it were up to me, and I'm like, okay, Ryan, what would you do what would you do to fix this movie? I would have streamlined a lot of the movie. I would have taken the nurse Anne character and I would have just made that Chris, like make that the actress lady and then make her
Yeah.
like almost like a mystery or something, or maybe not
Fate.
even make her a neighbor
She
or
talks
something.
about fate. She's like,
Right.
I was destined to live next to you. Can you imagine
Get
if
rid of
Chris
the
lived next to them? Like it
and
was
have
like
her
destiny.
maybe get rid of the friend character of the dads and then make it fine. And like if you're gonna go on this whole route of like we're not gonna have the Catholic Church in this movie because for whatever reason the filmmakers made it a point had to make it a point, then like fine, but like maybe and you're keeping in with the Hades stuff. Well, okay, great. What if Chris is friends with this Haitian priest and she's the one who helps do this, and maybe the end of the movie is kind of just a little more streamlined, a little different. And then if you're going to bring in like the Baptist, the Baptist pastor, maybe kill him, maybe find a reason why like he's not as like, maybe even add a little more element of like, oh, he's in it for the money, he's in it for the fame, and then like
The friend
utilize
should have been
that,
killed.
you know
The friend with the
well, that's what I'm saying. In my
glasses,
version, you get rid of the
he
friend.
should have
Like,
been
don't even have the
killed.
friends,
Well, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but I'm just saying, like, you could there's a
to
lot
have
of
some
things they could
resonance,
have done to fix it.
you had a Catholic priest who we knew nothing about him, and
I
he
liked
was
and here's the thing. I liked him because I felt like he seemed like somebody who went out of his way to be like, I'm gonna be the best Catholic priest on film. Because he really, like, to me, it was like, yeah, that's exactly how I've met many Catholic priests. They just seem exactly like this guy. But I think they just like they don't do the best for that character, and it's kind of a shame. I'm just like,
yeah, he
I'm
came
sorry.
in and it was like he's
Comes in,
here. And then 30 seconds later he's dead, and it was just like,
yeah, and I'm
okay,
like,
that was for
okay.
shock value, and you're like, nah, you got your shock value, but it just ends up falling flat because it's
So are
lame.
we in agreement though here? Are we gonna say below Indiana Jones, above Scream 6? Because I feel very comfortable in that realm. I think it's in the perfect area where it should go. As far
Yeah,
as this movie.
I'm there.
Because
I'm
I
going
do
to
like you do make a lot of points. Is like this movie isn't 100% terrible. I think 2/3 of it is actually genuinely really good, and then yeah, we get to that end and it's just like yikes,
yeah. I went ahead and made the change. I am mobile. I'm mobile. So
No.
I can't show it in real time, but we are plugging in at position 26, below Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, but above Scream 6. It's a good spot. I
It's a very
dig
good
that spot.
somewhere in the middle.
And I've covered everything. I think again, anybody saying it's like the lowest of the low and that it's the worst Exorcist movie, I disagree, because it has something that you can latch onto and care about for the majority of it. Whereas Exorcist 2, there's just the whole time watching it, I'm like, I've said before that the worst way that you can describe a movie is that it's boring. But when it comes down to it, when you have nothing to latch onto, and you're saying, what is the purpose of this? Why should I care? And then after you watch the movie, you go and research it, and even the filmmakers say, oh, we didn't care either. You go, oh, okay. We have a mutual friend who will say, uh nobody ever sets out to make a bad movie. Everybody who's ever tried to make a movie ever, they're really trying hard to make the most incredible movie. No. Some people really do just set out. And I know John Borman probably tried to make the movie good, but the producers were like, no, we're not setting out to make anything of quality. We're
Well, he
just
made
trying to
Zardoz,
cash in
so
on
I
the
don't know.
craze.
I don't know. He made Zardoz. I don't know.
Zardoz? What?
The Sean Connery movie
Oh,
with the
yeah,
floating
Barton.
heads and the yeah.
I've never seen that movie, but I have seen Excalibur, and it's one of the best movies ever. So
It's
I don't know. But John Borman, though, he was like, I want to make a movie with a pre-sold audience where I can kind of explore the spiritual. But what ends up happening is that Exorcist 2 is a lot about hypnosis and people being joined by hypnosis. And then also that anybody that's ever been possessed by Pazuzu is a spiritual warrior who's going to usher in the next phase of human evolution where everybody is kind of linked
This sounds amazing. This sounds like
religiously, and
incredible.
it sounds
So
great.
good.
And then the
Sounds
execution is
sounds
terrible.
awful, actually. Sounds
This
awful,
movie,
actually.
is clearly above that. It is clearly
Right.
better than
I think
Exorcist 2.
when you just even how in which the girls are, they go off together, and like I was on the edge of my seat. It's like it's a really good way of getting you into the movie as far as like they go off together, they trying to talk to the dead. You don't know what happens to them for 3 days. They come back, they're possessed, and then like
Those
we kind of
again,
do the
those
same thing the
scenes,
original did, is we're trying
the
to figure out what's
medical
wrong with them.
scenes are.
All that
I mean,
stuff's good.
I was clenched up because they're receiving their RAPE.
Kind of wanted to look away. I was like,
and
I
you're like,
usually,
"Ah."
yeah, it was
Yeah,
good stuff.
yeah, it's rough.
Yeah. Anyway, speaking of which,
Speaking of which,
you have anything else you want to add?
no, I'm good.
I'm
Here you
good
go.
too.
Boom. For
So
Lydia
these
and
lovely
Olivia.
ladies,
Yeah.
Lydia and Olivia.
So good on them.
They
They done good.
Yeah, you would think that we would put like, what's her face from the original. I'm like, no. These two, like they do an incredible job of being incredibly sweet and then creepy and then just even more creepy. And then on top of that, they have to wear makeup for a good chunk of the time they're on there. And they're good at what they do. So
yeah. So
good on
again,
them.
just like Evil Dead, where it's like we have to have the cabin. Again, I reiterate, we have to, let's bring in Chris. And if they would have brought in Chris, because like Victor's watching her on YouTube and all that stuff was cool, where it's like, what happened to Chris after the events of the first movie? That was interesting. That actually added to the lore. But then the moment that she joined in, Victor goes to her house, then he leaves. That should have been it. She should have just not been any part of it. But instead it was, she's going to be a part of it because she said, I don't know where my daughter is. So then at the end of the movie, Linda Blair walks in and is like, it's me, Mom. I basically, I caught wind that you were blinded and now I'm here. And it's supposed to be this cathartic moment, but instead it just ended. It felt like a cash grab for them. It didn't do anything for the movie. I'm very, very cynical about it. Whereas these two girls they went through the same experience that Linda Blair went through, where, and they went through it collectively, which is interesting to have the movie having two girls. I know I sounded kind of cynical in my quick review, but the movie having the two of them together isn't just upping the ante. It was interesting. I wish that would have paid off better. I kind of wish that both of them had an in-depth backstory so that you really didn't want either of them to go, and that one of them dying would have had more emotional impact. But that doesn't change the fact that them as actresses, they were impressive. They were the best part of this movie. Victor's a great actor, but these girls made the movie. They deserved more. If there's a director's cut at some point that expands on them, great. But
Yeah.
Otherwise they're the ones. They're the chosen ones.
No heroin.
I sipped once for one of them, and I'm gonna sip.
Oh, nice.
Again.
Where's my remote? Hold on. Where's my remote? I've been wanting to do this every time we do this. I want to do the. Oh wait, we can't see it because is the camera rainbow? Yeah, we go rainbow colors. Here, hold on. Let me just put this in the take that down for a second. There we go. Yay, we did
Yay.
it.
All right. So Lydia and Olivia.
Ah,
Cheers.
cheers.